If you're not quite getting the results you want when creating characters, I'm going to share with you a few techniques today that will help you take a little bit more control over your consistent characters when using Midjourney. And the first technique is to create a set of images for your character instead of just one. Now, in order to have the best consistency, a single character image can work, but it's actually not as reliable when it comes down to the finer details. Because different shots and images we want to generate will actually require different levels of detail depending on how far we're zoomed in or zoomed out, it actually helps to make a set of images that cover things like the face only, a full body shot, or even profile or back side shot. So that way, whenever you're creating those images, you can pick the right reference image to get the best result out of what you're creating with Midjourney. But we're going to start by creating a simple base image, and then we're going to move on from there. Now, when coming up with our prompt, we really need to describe a character thoroughly. So some ideas could be things like complexion, ethnicity, eye and hair color, the build of the person. Are they athletic? Are they tall, short, stocky? What they're wearing, or basically anything that you want to see in your character. You want to try and put that in your prompt to get a better chance of generating an image that resembles the character you're trying to create. So you can see with my prompt here, I have described an old battle-hardened warrior. She's a woman in her 30s, black hair, green eyes, olive skin, and athletic build. I've gone into a lot of detail as to what I want to see with my character. Now, to start off, I'm going to go into my settings because I want to change the aspect ratio to something relatively tall because I want to create like a full body image to start off with. So I want to sort of get something that's going to fit quite well. I submit my prompt and I'm able to generate these 4 images. Now, I'm not entirely happy with these images. They're pretty close to what I want, but not exact. One thing you'll have to get used to is the fact that you're going to have to try to adjust your prompt, maybe even re-roll a few times in order to get the results you're after. This is something that's a part of pretty much any AI art process, is you're not going to get what you want straight away, so you do have to re-roll and adjust as you go. So after a few adjustments and a few retries, I've got these images on the screen here, and I really like this particular image, so I'm going to run with that. Now that we actually have that image, we can start to generate our various different sets from that as a base. So I'm actually going to go into the Midjourney editor for this image, and I'm going to just reframe, shrink it into position because I want to create a full body shot that I can use for my future images. Now, sometimes you're going to get weird little issues here, like it's not showing things like the shoes. So what I would actually recommend is adding something in there like the type of surface you want them to stand on. I've put here standing on stone tiles because by simply mentioning that, Midjourney tries to include it in the image and therefore will generally put something like the shoes on those tiles. So that could be a little tip for trying to frame things up to get the full body image of your character. And now we have a full body image, and we need to move on to something like a close-up of the face. Now, all I'm simply going to do is I'm going to go back to our original image, drag it in as an Omni Reference, and then I'm going to add in that I want a close-up to the start of the prompt and get it to generate a shot of the face and add in a lot more detail so that way we can generate our face shot. So we've ended up with some very consistent options. I really like this image here. On top of that, I'm going to head into the editor again, and I'm just going to erase some of the blemishes in the face that I don't want to see. And then I'm going to add a simple prompt in there, something like clean skin. And you may even need to go through and just simply minimize each area and slowly chip away to remove the little blemishes one by one. And then we replicate that process. I use the full body image as an Omni Reference, and I'm able to create a full body side profile shot like what you see here, or a full body shot from behind, I say showing her back, so that way we can create some images to use from those various angles if we need to. Now, if you do have a lot of trouble with the Omni Reference, getting the images you want, just remember you can always go to the Omni weight. If you need more flexibility with your character, you can dial it down and rely a bit more on the prompt. Or if you really need it to lean more on the actual reference image, you can bring the strength up. With these images here, I've used an Omni weight of 175. This is actually just one I've been running pretty much by default, but I find that works well for what I'm doing here. But now we have a full set of character images from different levels of zoom and different angles that we can start to use when generating images of our character. Now, you can simply drag these images up from the feed into your prompt bar, or you can download them and drag them across each time you use it. But I actually have a little tip that'll make life a little bit easier when you're working with your character. One quick hack you can use for easy reference is to download all of the images and highlight them all. I'm going to drag them off screen for a second, click on this image icon, and then drag these images into here. Now I'm actually going to go over here and hit a little bin icon to remove it from the bar, but you'll notice we can actually click on any of these images right across here without having to drag them in each time or go looking through our feed to use them for future sort of character reference images. So now we have a full set of images for our character that we can use and switch between when we're creating images with Midjourney. But the next step is choosing which reference you want to actually use when you generate your character images. Now this is a pretty simple process. All we need to do is focus on the framing and the angle that we're going to be creating with our character. And then we need to pick an image which best matches up with that angle or that framing to get an optimum amount of detail from our character reference image. So I have a prompt here describing our female warrior holding up a sword, squatting down in a battle ready stance. And I want to basically pick my Omni reference. And because we want to see the full body and costume of our character, we use the full body image as our Omni reference. When I submit that, and you can see how we're able to basically use that character in our scene. She's squatting and we have some consistency across the whole costume. And just thought I'd show you the actual Omni reference so you can see how consistent it is from the reference using that same prompt across to the image. However, we switched that Omni reference image to the one of her from behind, and it changes the angle of the shot. Now, most of these shots actually turned out like this. They turned out with a different angle. So simply changing that Omni reference to a different angle did have an impact on this particular image, so it could more effectively focus on what it sees in that Omni reference to apply to the image. And the same happens here, where I've changed the prompt to say a shot from behind, but I've used the Omni reference from the front. You'll actually notice if you take a close look, some of the belts and different bits and pieces that are on the front of the costume have been painted onto the back. But if we switch to the rear facing shot, now we have a more consistent back that matches what we originally generated. So having a front and back Omni reference makes it much more effective for consistency of costume from different angles. And of course, again, if we're going to have a facial shot, we really want to get something closest to the face as possible. So changing it to a close-up face shot while using the face as the Omni reference is going to be your best bet for actually getting a really nice close-up shot of the face. So I definitely recommend having those different angles and different shots to get the best results. Now, Omni reference does have a lot of limitations. It's a simple fact, you can only use one image, and sometimes you just don't quite get the results you want. So I have a backup option for you, which is we can use a character reference instead of an Omni reference for when we have trouble with our images. So once again, it's a pretty simple process. We just need to switch to version 6.1 and use the character reference. I'll show you how that works. So if Omni reference isn't doing the job we're after, what we can do is come up to our prompt settings, and instead of using version 7, we can switch to version 6.1. So what this means is that now if we use the same text, again, I'm clicking on the text, not down here because I only want the text prompt to be there, is this time when I click on add images, I can drag the face into character reference, which has now replaced the Omni reference. And because I want the top half to match as well, I now have a reference of the top half of the body, but also the face in detail. Now, while Omni reference is generally the better choice, you can see here that because we can only choose one image with Omni reference, character reference has the advantage of being able to use multiple images. So this means you can upload the full set if you wanted to, or pick particular references. I like to pick very particular references, and it just gives you a little bit more of a control having that other option to use when generating character images. Now, one thing I want to mention is that it's still actually worth describing some of the features. So at the end here, I'll say, the woman has green eyes, black hair, and olive skin. I want to make sure we get those green eyes because sometimes with the character reference, I find it loses some of those details. And if you have the same problem with Omni reference, you can try that as well. But I submit, and we're able to use that same method to get some images like these ones on screen here. Now, there's another really good reason to actually use character references and get used to using them is not so much when you're generating your initial image, but the simple fact is you can't, at least at the time of recording this video, you can't use Omni references in the editor, which means if you have anything you want to change, you're going to need to switch to a character reference. So that is the next tip we're going to look at, and that is using the editor to fix some errors with your character. Now, one thing to remember is that sometimes there's going to be little mistakes. AI is still a little bit of a gamble, regardless of these controls we have. But if I click on this image here and I go to edit, she's missing her headband. So what I can do is I can actually remove these two character references here, grab this face and drag it up on its own. Then I'm going to come down to the editor itself and just remove this top part of the head here. I'm going to leave that little hair there. And I'm just going to say, a female warrior wearing a headband, and because I have this reference here, I submit, And I'm able to make that small adjustment to the head and add that headband back on using Midjourney's editor. Now, sometimes Midjourney editor can be a bit tough. It doesn't necessarily always want to get the face right. So my next tip is actually to lean a little bit on some external face swapping tools when you need to fix the face of your character. Now, of course, you can try the Midjourney editor and that can work pretty well. But these tools, there's a whole bunch of them online these days. One that you can use for free is Pixie AI, a nice simple drag and drop interface. You pop in your face image and your target image, you hit swap, and it will apply the face to that image. And you can see from this image here, it's done a pretty decent job. But there's also another tool I like to use, Design AI. I'll pop a link in the description below, but this is a paid tool, but it does a really good job of offering a few different options you can choose from. And as you can see from this image, that turned out pretty well also. But on top of that, you can head to Google, do a quick search, and you can actually find a whole bunch of face swapping tools there to try out. And if you actually want to see me compare some of these tools in a future video, leave a comment below and I'll look at doing a video on various face swapping tools. And if there's any in there you want me to try, let me know and I'll give it a go. Now, I just want to quickly mention, if you like the information in this video and you want more just like it, check out my Midjourney course. Very comprehensive. It goes into a lot of different techniques like this. I'll leave a link in the description below so you can check that out. But moving on to our next tip, we want to take more control over the framing of our images. So sometimes when you create images in Midjourney, the prompt you put in doesn't necessarily reflect the image you get, which means sometimes things don't get quite framed up the way you want to. But luckily there's a nice little system I've worked out that makes it a lot easier. As long as you can get the angle right, you can then move the image into any position within the frame. It's a simple process again, so I'm going to jump in, show you how that works. The first thing that you have to mention is the angle. So we have here a low angle shot of our female warrior in a battle stance, along with the rest of the details we want to see in the image. So we have the angle that we want, but maybe we wanted to frame her into a different position of the image. So what I can do is go to edit, and I'm going to keep the prompt the same for now, but I'm going to go to move and resize. And what I can do to zoom out, I can just simply pop this into position, leaving enough space for the rest of her body and sword to be generated. So I hit submit edit. And then we've been able to add information around her and essentially reframe her within the image. Now, your imagination is really the limit here. You can move it off to one side and generate some more detail off to, say, the left, or you can move it up, down, place this anywhere in the frame and simply generate the blank space to put that character wherever you want. And this is why getting the angle is so crucial at the start, is because you can't change the angle in the editor, but you can change the position. But also, what we can do is click on our subject and resize it, or hover outside, and we can even rotate if we decided we want to rotate that angle a little bit. So if I rotate that a little bit this way, I can still submit and generate the scene by actually rotating to get something a bit more of an artistic angle on the image. But here is where it doesn't work. If I go back to our original and maybe I decide I want to zoom in on the face, I can't actually resize this any further. Even if I try to crop this in like so, to zoom in on the face, I hit submit and we get an error. So there is a solution to this. The way it works, we go back to our original image here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a subtle upscale. But if you want to try it, you can also try a creative upscale and choose from one or the other. In this case, I think the subtle upscale has worked best because I want to get as much resolution out of this image as I possibly can. I then download this image. I then head to Google and search for Adobe Image Cropper, and you'll see here there's a free image cropper you can use. I drag my image in and we can crop from here. However, I want to make sure I stick at 16:9, so I'm going to go 16:9 over here on the right and move this into position so we get a nice close-up of the face, showing a little bit of the hand and the sword, and we're going to crop that image. I then hit download. Then I get back to Midjourney and I go to the edit tab here. I edit new image, drag and drop my crop in, and if I want to, I can still make edits to this. But if I don't want to, all I need to do is bring my brush size right down, maybe just remove a little bit from the corner up here, add a prompt, female warrior, green eyes, black hair, submit. It will just simply fill in that little spot, and now I can upscale to the gallery to bring it up to a full resolution Midjourney upscale. And we've upscaled our image and cropped it to the area that we wanted to focus on. So by focusing on the angle and moving things around, we can do basically whatever we need to do with the framing of our image. But also, if I head back into edit And if we've got a little bit too much damage in the face, maybe there's some areas I'm not happy with. I'm happy with the lips and that sort of thing here. So I'm going to bring my brush size down, just remove some of the dirt on the face, maybe replace the eyes to try and get something closer to what I had imagined. So the areas I want to replace, I remove again. I make sure I remove the version 7 from the end of the prompt. I come up to my settings, I switch from version 7 down to version 6.1. And the reason we do this is because now when I click on the image, we can't use Omni Reference in the editor, but we can use Character Reference with version 6.1. So I drag the face into the Character Reference area, submit the edit, and I'm able to smooth out the skin, replace the eyes, and rely a little bit more on our character reference. Now, so far we've been working with one single character, but we all know that when it comes to stories, quite often there's more than one character in a scene. So what we're going to do in the next tip is look at ways you can generate multiple consistent characters into an image with Midjourney. Now, of course, there's a few different ways of doing this, but they all take place in the editor. I'm going to show you two that I like to use. So I have these images of this large warrior character here. Now, if I want to add two consistent characters into a scene, I need to use the Midjourney editor. However, the editor is actually very frustrating in that often it will not simply add a character into a scene very effectively. So we need to actually prompt for two characters within our scene. So if I were to take this prompt here, trim it down a bit, I have a female warrior, I'm going to say, I have a female warrior standing next to a much larger male warrior. Now, I've actually described it as having a huge build and a mean look, so I'm going to add in the male has a huge build and mean look. I've got an angel tip on the background, stomach closed. The woman has black hair, a headband, holding her sword over her shoulder. So I've described both the male and the female warrior, and I want to try and produce an image, but using either an Omni reference or a character reference for the woman, so that we get one of the characters consistently in the scene. Now, one quick note I've noticed during the edit here is that it says character references here. However, in the prompt, I have version 7. So this will actually use this image as an Omni reference if I switch to version 7 within the prompt itself. So just be aware of that when you're creating your characters. I now submit to generate the image. Now, I really like the framing of this image, and I really want to use this warrior. So what I'm going to do is open this image up. I'm going to save it, come back up to this image. And first of all, before I even get started, you'll note that he has a cape here. Our warrior doesn't have a cape or a helmet. We can see he has what similarities he has, such as the top of his arm is showing, but that's really about it. The arm's similar, everything else needs to be replaced. So I open this up, I go into edit, and I'm simply going to replace the entire character. Now, I do want to mention that you can replace the entire character at once. However, if you're having trouble, one thing you can do is make sure you leave behind little bits and pieces of the existing character. So you might want to replace the head first and the body later, because sometimes Midjourney just needs something to hold on to. In this particular instance, I'm going to go with replacing the whole character because that does work most of the time. But just remember, you can replace bits and pieces at a time if you're having trouble keeping the character in the scene. And this time, we have our female character, so I make sure that I'm using version 6.1. I head over to our image. I upload the image of our male warrior. I'm going to close it from image prompts, but drag it over to character reference. So we're using version 6.1 with a character reference, which is not available with version 7. And so now if I submit that, you can see how it's added in our warrior here. There's a few little differences, but it's not exactly the same. But this is probably going to be the best build that we have. So this basically comes back to what I was saying before. I tried to replace the whole character, but it didn't quite get it right. The good news is I can go through and select various areas of the body and replace them bit by bit. So I recommend taking a little bit of time if you're having trouble with this. Select every little individual piece you can, change it, and then whatever you get right, you can leave behind and slowly chip away and fix up bits and pieces of the image. You'll notice that I didn't have a necklace at the very end of this one, so I just simply created a space for the necklace, typed in that I wanted a tribal necklace there, and was able to add that in. So going through the editor and just selecting the bits and pieces of the image that you need to repair is a really good way just to kind of fix up that shot. Now, it's a bit long-winded, but it's probably the best way you have of getting exactly what you want when generating character images with Midjourney when you have more than one character. But now we have our final image here where we're able to create. But I mentioned I have another process. So the idea behind my second process is that instead of actually generating the characters in the editor, we're going to generate the characters separately along with a separate background, bring them all in and place them onto the scene. Now there are some difficulties with getting a consistent style, so I've covered that and I'll show you in this process how that option works as well. Now to get better results, I'm going to switch back to version 7 for this particular image because I want to use this as an Omni reference. I drag it up into my Omni reference and then I type a prompt. I have a huge male warrior holds a massive axe over his head, screaming aggressively, ready for battle. So now I send that on and then we get a few options. This one looks pretty good, so I'm going to download that to the computer, coming here. But the next step is to get a similar image for our warrior woman. I really like the expression on some of these here. However, the style doesn't match, but I'm going to go ahead and use that exact same prompt. But this time I come up to the top. Because we're using this image, I'm going to use it as a style reference so that we get similar kind of color, maybe even lighting. So we're able to use Omni reference for our warrior woman along with a style reference for the man. But instead of medium shot, we can see this is a bit of a low angle. So I'm going to say a low angle shot of a female warrior, furious anger, submit. And then we get these results here. So you can see we kind of have a bit of a similar match, not exactly, but I think this will do the trick. So we have this image here. Again, I'm going to go ahead and download that. And then the final step is to use this prompt again, but this time I'm going to remove the Omni reference. And all I'm going to type in, an empty battlefield, lots of ancient temples in the background, lots of smoke. When I submit that, we've got these scenes here, which look pretty epic. I think this one is going to be the one to work with. So you can see now we have 3 separate images, one for each character and one for the background, all with a relatively consistent style and a bit of a yellowy, goldy kind of tint added to it. So using the style reference is a great way to kind of bring that all together. Now what we're going to do is bring them into the editor and put them all together. So what I'm going to do is click on this, but instead of downloading, this time I go over to edit. I'm going to open in the edit tab. I'm going to drag in our male character, which is in here, and I'm also going to drag in our female character. And you can see we have all 3 in layers down here. So what I'm actually going to do now is I'm going to select this top layer, go to Smart Select, and we're going to click on our character and slowly select her piece by piece. Now the selection's a bit rough, but that's actually better for getting it to blend in with what we're going to do next. I click on Erase Background, not Erase Selection, because if I erase selection, it will erase her. So I erase background. And then one last time, I click on this little space inside of her arm here, and I erase the selection. Now, the layer system is what really makes this possible in the Midjourney editor. And you can see how we're able to select our character and cut it out, but we also need to repeat that process for the male warrior as well. So now I can actually take her and move her around. So I'm going to move her off to the side, and I'm going to drag our male character to the top, and we're going to do the exact same process. And so now we can control who goes in front, the woman being the bigger image. We kind of want to pop her in the front. Now we can resize her, we can rotate her, we can actually move the various characters around and pop them where we want to in the scene. So we actually have both characters here like they're ready for battle. So the only thing we need to do now is set things up so that they blend in, which means we have to select the background layer here, get the paint tool, and then we want to just create some space either down here where the man hasn't reached, but also just around the outside so we can blend him into the background. You can use your mouse wheel to increase or decrease the brush size. We also do the same for the female. We erase the background around her. But finally, also, we need to make sure we erase any overlap here. So with the woman being in front, we then select the male on this layer and we just create some space around the female so that she can blend in with him behind her. So now we have space around the characters for them all to be blended in. We type in a simple prompt, 2 warriors in the battlefield, ancient temples in the background. I submit, and so we've been able to put these 2 warriors into this background. So that gives you a little bit more control over each individual character as you can take time with each individual image and you get a little bit more control over the final result. It is more work, but again, you do get more control. But the only thing is, this still isn't quite as good as using something like, say, Adobe Photoshop. You get a little bit more control with that. And to give you an idea, it's another tip I actually recommend is learning how to use Adobe Photoshop. I say this all the time, so you're probably sick of hearing it. But essentially, using Photoshop gives you more options. It gives you more control and you can get a bit higher quality out of the final image. The cool thing about Photoshop is I can drag my characters in and work with them a little bit more closely. One thing I can do is I'm actually going to position this guy on the screen, and I'm going to use Adobe's generative fill around the outside to extend the background of this top layer. That all looks pretty good. I'm going to merge these layers, move them across a little bit, and I actually want to use this smoke as part of the background. So again, I'm actually going to duplicate this layer, turn one of them off, and then I'm going to cut them out by going to select subject. And it does a much better job of automatically selecting the character and cutting out things like finer hairs and that. I mask that, and it blends in not too bad. But what's really cool is if I turn on the layer behind it, I can double click, use an option called blend if to kind of blend the smoke in a bit. And I think adding that smoke in and blending it has done a great job of separating him from the background so he really stands out. So you have a little bit more control in instances like that. Now I know I moved pretty quick there, but with Photoshop, it's really a tutorial on its own. But if this is something you're interested in, I'm going to pop a few videos in the description below, which cover some of the processes I've used with AI art in Photoshop in the past, essentially kind of photo bashing various images together, but also put a full playlist of tutorials I've created below. But also I'm considering starting a second Photoshop channel. So again, if this is something that you want, please leave a comment below I just want to know if people actually want this. But I think it'd be a good idea to be able to have that channel so you guys can actually learn how to take the next step, move into Photoshop, and get even better results with your AI art. But coming back to our image, I used the same process that I used on our male warrior to cut out the female with select subject, but I'm actually going to copy some of the smoke from that male warrior. I can even use generative fill to fill him in order to put the smoke in place, and then I can blend it into the image and get another layer of separation between the characters. And of course, I can adjust the position of the smoke, even bring the opacity down a little bit to make sure I get it looking the way I want to. And then this is the final result we're able to get from Photoshop. It's a little bit easier to view as the characters are a little bit separated. But to give it a bit of a step up, I'm also going to drag it into Topaz Gigapixel, do a creative redefine upscale on it in order to add a little bit more detail and really set that off. But from that image, I've still noticed a little bit of a difference, and that is her eyes aren't green. But again, because we're using Photoshop, I'm just going to take it in there and I just draw a little bit of green onto a new layer with a color blend, and I'm able to add a nice green tint to the eyes. And again, this is the final result after using Photoshop to edit that image into place. So those are the main tips and techniques that I use when working with characters in Midjourney. The ability to nail down the character at the start with your set of images, getting those different angles gives you more options when generating images, and then of course you can control the angle, add in more characters, and from there you can basically move in almost any direction using those handful of techniques. So just remember, if you want to learn more about Midjourney and more techniques like the ones I shared in this video, check out my Midjourney course. I will leave a link in the description below where I cover a lot more different techniques to use Midjourney in various different areas. But otherwise, that's the video for today, guys. I want to thank you for watching the video. If you have any tips that you didn't see here that you think people would like to know, leave a comment, share them with the community, and from there, we can start to get better and better at Midjourney as we go along. But again, thank you for watching the video. Hope you liked it. If you did, please consider giving it a like. Otherwise, hope to see you again soon. Have a great day.